Any parting advice or thoughts for law firm owners out there on how best to sort of get their heads around this and protect themselves?
Yeah, so again, I know I laughingly said I want to scare you. I kind of do, in the sense that I just want everyone needs to pay attention to this. And I say every single business needs cybersecurity planning and some level of insurance. And I've got clients, I've got a 3-person operation landscaping company, right? They hired me to give them some basic level advice, like a data breach avoidance plan, which we work through all this stuff, get you the right insurance, make sure you're locked down, an incident response plan to make sure that you know what happened, because you don't want to build a bridge when it's on fire, a tech policy to make sure, a disaster recovery plan, and you have the insurance, you have these plans in place. In my opinion, understanding, yes, I do this for a living, but it's something you really have to do, because the odds that you're going to have an incident, it's going to happen. It used to say when something happens, and then it said it was if something happens. Now it's when something happens, and it's when it happens again. So you're going to have an incident. It's going to happen more than once. And the better prepared you are and the more financially secure you are with insurance, the more resilient you're going to be, because you're not Jones Day and you're not going to survive a big hit. I think the average cost of a data breach is mid-6 figures, if it's of any significance. And if you don't have insurance, that'll put a soul of wonder. So it's just, you've got to be protected and you've got to have insurance. And I'm always happy to talk about it. Again, I've got that free guide, which if you go through, will give you some pointers to start. But yeah, I'm always happy to talk about it. I just want to make sure people are protected because it's such a big deal.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than normal. We do have a guest, but it's not going to be our usual interview format. This is a repeat guest, so I'm excited to have Kellam Parks back. If you want to listen to his first appearance, got to go back to episode 58. You can learn all about him and his background and his journey there. But today, let me back up. So Kellam is a partner at Parks Zeigler, and one of his practice areas and specialties is cybersecurity law. And that's really what I want to focus on today. There's been some things in the news over the last couple weeks that really got me thinking, and I wanted to bring an expert on to talk about that stuff. So, Kellam, thanks for coming back on.
It's great. Well, I'm really glad that because you couldn't find any experts, you got me. So I'll do the best I can for you, my friend. But I'm happy to talk about it. But yeah, so I do. Yeah, we have cybersecurity, data privacy. I started the practice about 9 years ago, and so I do my best to be able to know what I'm talking about in those areas.
Well, I'll say around here, the expert bar is very, very low. So
fantastic. Well, I will try not to make it any lower. I'll do my best.
Well, cool. So there are, like I said, and I've been thinking about this lately because, I'm sure just as part of your practice, data breaches all the time. But recently, I'd say in the last few months, I've had a number of clients that have experienced it in a variety of different ways. And so it's just really got me thinking. And then about 2 weeks ago, there's a press release about Jones Day, which is one of the biggest law firms in the world. They announced that they'd had a data breach and that they said, I think, around 10 or so of their clients' data was compromised. And I believe one of their clients is President Trump. So maybe that's what they're after. I don't know. So I assume you've seen the news?
I have, yeah. It's interesting. So I don't know. I actually did. I'd seen the news. I didn't pay a lot of attention to it in the sense that I see these things. First of all, I deal with them all day long. So it's kind of like I don't want anybody else's problems. I'm not getting paid to pay attention to them, so I'm not going to do it. But also, it's just a lot. So I looked at it in preparation for us talk because, as we talked about, they haven't really, not surprisingly, they haven't released a lot of information, right? So when something happens, we call it a data incident. So it only becomes a breach when personal information or personal health information is compromised. And then it triggers either state or federal laws, and that's when you officially call it a breach. And that's when they have to tell people. So if you have an incident and stuff is taken, but it's not personal information like a social security number or not personal health information if you're subject to HIPAA, if you're not a lawyer, you don't have to tell anybody. If you're a lawyer, You have to tell existing clients, and that's an ABA ethical thing. Interestingly enough, the legal ethics opinion from the ABA says you don't have to tell former clients. They say your duty to their data is no longer in existence because they're not your client anymore, which I thought was interesting. That's not my advice. My advice is you should tell your former clients. But from an ethical point, so they had to tell their clients, and then it got out. And so, like you said, it was about 10 clients is what they said. What happened was there was a hacking group called Silent Ransom, also known as Luna Moth, and they've got some other names. They specifically targeted these law firms, and that's part of their MO, is they target law firms. Interestingly, they didn't hack them. They did social engineering. So they did phishing, where somebody pretends to be somebody else, and we don't have any details. So I tried to figure out what happened. They haven't disclosed it, but this group targeted one particular attorney who apparently headed up their U.S. Court of Appeals work for the federal circuit, basically a lot of IP matters. They targeted this poor guy, and his name was released. No comment from him, but they figured out maybe who he was. But they targeted this guy and somehow got into his stuff, and I don't know how, and we can talk about some theories about how this works. I don't know how they got in, but they got in, about 10 clients. They said old data. They were demanded a lot of money. Apparently, and there's screenshots out there if somebody's interested, apparently there's screenshots that supposedly are between Jones Day and the bad guys. It's not been confirmed whether it's accurate, but maybe. Where they wanted, I think, $15 million. They wanted a lot of money. And apparently they offered some counter. They didn't take it. And so then they do what often happens is they release it on the dark web, sell it probably if it was, valuable. And it's kind of a black eye on the firm. Obviously, the danger is you lose some confidence in your clients and that kind of stuff. But it happens to everybody, whether you're Jones Day or solo, unfortunately. So that's all we know. They were also the target. They weren't a target. They were affected by a breach back in 2021. So there's a third-party file transfer company called Celeron, and they were actually hacked, as I understand it. And Jones Day information, as well as some others, were affected, about 100 gigabytes. That wasn't Jones Day's fault because it was a third party, but it happens too. So it just happens, man. It's tough.
Well, it's scary times. I mean, Jones Day, one of the biggest firms, you would imagine they have spent a ton of money really protecting as best they can. And if it can happen to them, how are the small guys like me going to protect myself? It is scary stuff. I mean, like I said, I've known some other folks who've gone through this recently, and there was one that had the ransom issue. There's the sort of the business interruption issue, where you might lose. You can't work on clients if you bill by the hour and you can't work on clients for weeks. You're going to lose money. And so, how do these breaches or incidents usually happen in your experience?
Yeah. So there's really two main ways, right? One way is you're actually hacked. And so I would say it's not a large part of my practice that this happens, but it does happen. So I'm counsel, there's a company in Virginia that's a self-insurance pool, and they insure a lot of Virginia governments, and I'm their backup counsel when their main counsel has conflicts. Been working for them for a number of years now. And so I've had a couple of governmental clients where they were actually hacked. Somebody came in, found a vulnerability. It was a criminal organization, sometimes maybe even a state actor, where they come in and they literally, do the hacking type thing, get in through a vulnerability and get into the system and steal data or encrypt data, otherwise, or sit and wait and do something, and they're inside the system. That's actually more rare. And the good news about being small like us, right, is that a lot of times we're not going to be hacked. They're not going to target us. Jones Day was targeted. Again, it wasn't a hacking as I understand it. It was really just social engineering. But we as smaller fish, we're not going to take that kind of attention. What normally happens for us, and actually it looks like maybe in this case for Jones Day, even though it was targeted, is much of the social engineering or phishing, right? And these are the emails you're getting saying, oh, click here to get your file, or the one that I always laugh about is a text or email saying usually it's from a partner to an associate or an owner to an employee that says, hey, are you in this morning? And they say yes. And it says, hey, can you buy me these gift cards? Like, I don't know anybody who hasn't gotten it. We got one today. One of my attorneys said, hey, your email is in quarantine for some reason. I am in the office today. And I said, show me a screenshot. And I said, yeah. You note that was from Gmail. It wasn't to my actual email address, right? But then what happens is you click a link, right? And a lot of times you click the link, and then sometimes it's malware that's installed on your computer. Sometimes it's just they get access. So it says, hey, I'm your IT company. I need access to this thing or whatever. Even if you have multi-factor authentication, if somebody lets you in, if an employee clicks yes, then they get in. And a lot of those attacks, they don't come in and steal data. They don't encrypt data. What they do is they just sit and wait. And so they'll lurk, and then they'll see an opportunity then to pretend to be a CFO directing payments somewhere, or a client demanding their money be transferred somewhere. Sometimes they do. A lot of times they'll co-opt it's an email compromise. Well, they'll co-opt your email account. They'll put on rules so you no longer get any incoming messages. They go to trash so you don't even know something's wrong. They get your contact, and then they use your email to propagate to other people to try to get bigger fish. And that happens quite frequently as well. So it can happen a number of ways, right? And the key is be prepared, and I'm happy to sort of talk some high-level stuff, not be too technical on how to do that. But you want to have the right planning. You definitely want to have the right insurance, which we could talk about that too, because it's not a one-size-fits-all like it is with general liability or auto insurance for cyber, really. And then make sure you have the right help. Make sure you have the right IT company that knows what they're talking about when it comes to cyber, which unfortunately isn't as many as you would hope. There's a lot of really good IT companies, but they don't have the cyber chops. But it's not 100%. So you have to absolutely be vigilant. You got to train your people. Your people are your weakest link, not because they're bad employees or stupid or lazy. We're just human. And that's why social engineering works so well. And it sounds like for Jones Day, it sounds like that's what happened. Again, I don't know because they didn't disclose it, but it sounds like they targeted this guy and somehow got him to click something or accept something or do something, maybe, and got in. So it is scary for sure, 100%.
And so that's the thing. So like you said, the people are the weak link, and you can train, you can tell them over and over, but they get you when you're sort of sleepy, you're busy, you're multitasking, and they get you. And so, what are some ways? I mean, let me back up too. So, usually you click a link, and then maybe they ask for more information. Is the clicking of the link enough, or does it usually require more information to them?
No, it can just be clicking the link. So if you click a link and you don't have the right software installed, you don't have the right protections installed, first of all, it can take you somewhere where you start to, and this is a lot of times you see where these foreign-based people, such as China or India, they target older people and they go, you owe Microsoft a bill, click here, or a bank transfer, give us your login information so we can give you your refund, or you won the lottery or whatever it is. In a business setting, a lot of times you'll click a link and it's a file transfer saying, hey, download this file here. And it may be that a lot of times what happens, and we had this situation at my law firm about 8 years ago. Luckily, we caught it in time, but before we have all the protections we have now. I was just getting into cyber and we hadn't beefed up our protections to do all the stuff I'm going to tell you need to do. But what had happened is another attorney in another law firm had gotten compromised. The bad guys watched and saw what was going on. They saw that attorney and one of my attorneys was working on a project together, and that my attorney was waiting on a file from the compromised attorney. And so an email came from the compromised attorney's email. It was a real email from the attorney because bad guy got their account, sent a link to my attorney going, hey, click here for the file, which he was expecting, but it wasn't the real link. And click the link, which then led to somewhere that looked like it was, I think, Dropbox at the time. It wasn't, and it installed a program that had access to the email, which again, we caught it before we were compromised or had a real breach. But that a lot of times happens. So a lot of times and you won't know that something's installed, right? So it's on the background. Sometimes it does lead somewhere else where you're actually inputting information. And the key is, because your people are your weakest link, what you want to do is you do want to train them. So training, I can't tell you how important that is. And if you tell them what's happening and you give them ongoing training, it raises awareness. They don't get fooled as often. But like you said, even people that should be know better sometimes fall. So you want to have the systems in place to where it catches it. So what does that mean? All right, having a firewall and virus and malware protection isn't enough. Right? That's basic level stuff. And by the way, unfortunately, I deal with a lot of businesses and unfortunately a lot of solo attorney and smaller firms that don't have even the basics, which surprises me, but they don't. But what you also want to have is you want to have other things. So you should have multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication installed on every possible thing you can have. Right? That should not be a maybe. That should be a requirement on every single thing, and most things have it available these days. So Microsoft, Google, whatever. You also want to have something called EDR, Endpoint Detection Response, right? And what this is that software like SentinelOne is the one we use. There's lots of them out there. It gets installed on the devices, and it's machine learning that is monitoring the behavior of your machine real time, and it's looking for anything weird programs running. It's looking for weird downloads in the middle of the night or data or access that is unusual. It's looking across just all these data points to say, hey, something weird's happening, and then it alerts, it stops, right? So what happens is if you click a link, then the EDR should a lot of times catch it. We pair that with also what we call a SOC, a Security Operations Center. So we have a 24/7 manned operations center that we pay for, that the EDR clicks if it happens at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, which no one's working. I want my attorneys to work, but they're not working at 2 a.m. on Friday for some reason. But at 2 in the morning, something happens, and that then alerts the SOC, and the SOC can turn off the internet or can do something real time until my IT cybersecurity company can get to it on Monday. So if you have those three, and then the fourth thing, which is I find a lot of companies don't do, is what we call a conditional use policy. So, or a conditional access policy, right? So a conditional access policy is you're putting some sort of condition on how you can access data. It may be you have to do it, like only IP addresses from the United States can access, which we have, by the way, which isn't that great because you can use a VPN and pretend to be from anywhere. But one of the things that we do, which we found very effective, is the only way that you can access our data, so our SharePoint data, our Microsoft data, that kind of stuff, is if you're accessing it from a device, phone, tablet, computer, that we own or manage. So even if you somehow bypass you get my password, and even if somehow you bypass our multi-factor authentication, if we're not accessing it from a computer that we own or manage, you cannot access our data. So that's one step that goes beyond. So if a bad guy somehow gets into it and they're trying to access it from not one of my computers, they can't get it. And that one step, along with everything else that we're doing, really ensures that it's going to minimize, not 100%, but minimize. And we haven't had a data breach in 8 years or over 8 years because now we've had lots of incidences, we've had lots of attempts, we've had lots of weird things happen. We've had a couple of MFAs that shouldn't have been clicked that were clicked because people weren't paying attention. But the conditional use with all this other stuff stopped them from accessing our stuff.
Wow, that's a lot. So
it is a lot. I try to keep it high level, but I know it's a lot.
No, that's great. So I mean, sort of the phishing, the social engineering, the thing you mentioned a minute ago, it was a real email from a real attorney, and your attorney was expecting the attachment.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
I don't see how you can. That's not how do you prevent that? I'm not sure you can.
Well, the only way, I would say, the only criticism I have of that particular incident is had my attorney hovered over the link, you would see that it's not Dropbox. So, by the way, you can spoof a link too. So if you have a sophisticated criminal, it's not really hard to spoof the link. But all you had to do is, and I will tell you, now, but would you expect them to hover over a link that you're expecting an email from? I do. Why? Because I'm paranoid, and this is what I do for a living. But I don't hold that but so much against. Now, where I do have issues is when my employees or other things, they get some email. We had one the other day that was an email came to us supposedly from me about to pay a bill. And if you look in the chain of the email, it did have my actual email address and everything else. It looked real. But then the last email that was sent to my person had my email address at outlook.com or something, and it wasn't my email address. And I said, well, it's right there in the CC line. But that's part of what you have to train your people to do is take a second, look at everything. And by the way, we changed our standard operating procedure. We caught that. It didn't become an issue. But the new standard operating procedure is because that person had emailed to me something instead of calling me. And I said, hey, don't email, because if somebody was actually in our system, they would have seen you email me, and then who knows what would have happened. Call me next time. If you have some question, just pick up the phone and just say, hey, did you send this to me?
Yeah, we did that a while back at my firm. I said, I am never going to send you anything via email asking for this, and that, and the other.
Right.
If I need that, I'm either going to pick up the phone or walk down the hall. We use Teams chat. Maybe I'll go through there. That could probably get hacked too. But you are not going to get an email from me asking for certain information. You're just not going to get it.
No, I think that's great, and that's why you should have planned. Yeah, for sure. That's part of the planning. And that's about how, and I prefer that more than the incident response. So I do incident response where if you've been breached or there's an incident, I get hired to come in and hire the forensics company and work with them and do the required notices and do data mining and all that sort of stuff. I don't enjoy that as much because my hair's on fire and it's hard and it's a lot of work. It's lucrative, but it's hard work, and unfortunately it takes a lot of my personal time. And as you well know, I like to run the firm more than doing the at 26 years into it, I prefer running the thing instead of doing the thing. But about half of what I do now, and I hope it's larger in the future, is planning. And I work with companies and law firms across the nation because the planning is really consulting. I don't have to be a lawyer really to do it. Helps, but I don't practice law in other jurisdictions that I'm not licensed in. But I do planning, and that's part of it is I do the tech policy for companies where I come in and I go, okay, here's what you should do. Here's how you communicate. You need to put this in your handbook, have everyone sign off on it. And that's part of the standard operating procedures. Hey, these are the things we don't email about. Here's how we're handling it. Here's how you can use the tech. Here's the things. Here's our policies. Again, to keep everybody on the same page and make sure that you're as least locked down as you can be. It's important.
Real quick, if you haven't gotten a copy yet, please check out my book, The Law Firm Lifecycle. It's written for law firm owners and those who plan to be owners. In the book, I discuss various issues that come up as a law firm progresses through the stages of its growth, from just before starting a firm to when it comes to an end. The Law Firm Lifecycle is available on Amazon. Now back to the show. All right, so I want to go through some of that before I want to circle back on the multi-level protections you talked about. So the EDR
sure.
and the SOC and conditional access. Is that something that you would expect your IT company to do all that for you? I mean,
Yes.
Who does that for you?
Sure. Yeah, 100%. So part of what I advise. So your initial question was how are we possibly, if Jones Day can't protect themselves, how am I supposed to protect myself? And the answer is get good help. So you need to hire a competent IT vendor who has cybersecurity information. And it may not be. So I've seen a lot of these small and solo firms that their nephew Bob or their niece Jane is their IT person, and maybe they're qualified, maybe they're not. And one step up is they have this IT company they've used for 20 years, and they're really good at setting up computers and changing passwords. But you need a lot more than that, right? You need somebody that understands the cybersecurity space. The good news is you don't have to have a large company that's going to charge you $1 bazillion that you can't afford, because a lot of the smart IT vendors are now partnering with larger companies. Like Arctic Wolf is a national company that's a big player in this space for cybersecurity. And what they do is they license their expertise and tools to these smaller MSPs, these IT vendors, and say, hey, you're setting up their computers, you're handling their printer tickets, you're handling their day-to-day IT operations, but you don't know, you don't have the tools or the knowledge to do cyber. Come license our product. We will help, we will run their SOC, we will run their EDR, we will do this and that. And so you can do that as a third party. We actually have a company. They're out of Suffolk, Virginia, which is nearby where I live in Virginia Beach and Norfolk area. They're national, though. They work national, and they work with, actually, I've put them in touch with a couple of law firms across the nation. But they, not only do they do IT work, so they set up a computer, they do all the remote, the IT tickets and that kind of stuff. But they have the cybersecurity knowledge, and I've used them for incidences as well. So we pay them to do that. So they have set up the EDRs, they're managing the SOC, they're doing this, they're doing that, they're making sure we have our computers are already the conditional access, which is a piece of software, but it does cost money. So we have, just to give you an idea, we have 36 people. We have 3 offices in 2 states. We have 5 remote workers that are outside the United States. And between all of our devices and everything and their help and everything else, I think it costs us about $13,000 a month. But that's all our IT work. That's all. I mean, again, that's a lot of money, but we have 36 people. But that's all the license. It's all our Microsoft licenses. It's all the security for our system. It's their handling our IT work 5 days a week. It's quarterly planning. It's coming to our offices 4 times a year. So we get a lot. It's not cheap, but it's something as a mid-7-figure firm, it's a no-brainer for me to pay that. It's not something you can chintz out on, which unfortunately a lot of law firms just do. They just don't, either they don't know about it. I think a lot of times they just don't want to pay for it.
So question about the IT vendor. It sounds
Sure.
like, and people across the country listening to this, they're thinking, well, who can I get locally, or do I, are the options available that you don't have to be local? It sounds like the company you just mentioned does stuff all over the country. And if they did have questions, I assume they could reach out to you and you might be able to help them out in terms of vendors.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things there. One is the company that and I don't have an interest in them, but they're great. It's Layer 9 is the company we use. But they don't want to deal with anybody. Their ideal people are professions like us, which is great, but they also want a certain number of people to where it makes sense, right? So if I have a true solo or I've got a shop that's got like 5 people, they're not a good fit with Layer 9. It's going to be too expensive and too time consuming. So I've got other vendors that I use. What I will say is this, is if anybody does have questions, I'm always available. I've put together a guide, a cybersecurity guide for law firms, that the first half of the guide specifically talks about this. It says, hey, these are how you hire a good IT vendor that has cybersecurity information. These are the questions you should ask them to make sure that they're qualified. I've tried to keep it pretty high level because most lawyers aren't tech people, and I understand that. I can sympathize with that. But these are the kinds of things you need to verify. And then actually the second part of that guide is, here's high level how you protect yourself. And kind of what I went through is, hey, you have a conditional access policy, you've got a managed SOC, you've got this kind of software. And I've given that sort of as a breakdown. And so if anybody wants that guide, they can get it off my website, which is, and we can put it in the show notes later, but it's pzlaw.com/cybersecurity-guide. So if you go to that website and just click that, it's a landing page, just give me your name and email and I'll send it and you can download the guide. But yeah, and they can also just email me. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. Because it's important. I mean, it's not just business for me. It's absolutely, it's almost a mission for me to try to educate people, because having a breach, even an incident that's not a breach, is very disruptive, as you said. And as a lawyer, you theoretically could lose your license if you're not confidentially, protecting your client confidential data. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the things, and I don't want to scare everybody to death, but maybe we should be scared.
I don't mind scaring them, right? I want to, right?
What are the bad things? What are the things? Yeah. Somebody just says, don't worry about it. I'll just deal with it if it happens.
Sure.
Tell me, I know personally some of the things I've seen, not that have happened to me, but that have happened to others that I know. But what are some of the things that typically you would expect to happen if one of these ransom or data breach attacks happen?
Sure. So let's talk about best day scenario. If you're compromised in any way, your best day is they've gotten into your system somehow and you caught it fairly early. Maybe they just got into your email. You hire and you have to do an investigation. That's part of your duties. And by the way, and it's very difficult, but every state has their own cybersecurity law. And the only federal laws apply only in certain circumstances. So if you're in finance, there's a law. If you're in health, there's a law. If you're military, there's a law, or a contractor. But otherwise, it's state by state, which is difficult for somebody that deals with people in all 50 states. But you look to your state, and almost everyone says you have to take reasonable steps. So what do you have to do? You have to investigate, right? So you got to hire some forensics firm to come in and figure out what's happened, assuming they can actually tell what happened, because a lot of my clients don't have the high enough level of Microsoft, or they don't have the right auditing capabilities, or their IT. I have one right now, the IT guy didn't click a button. And so they were unable to go back more than 7 days to figure out what happened. Okay, well, because they can't tell what happened, now we have to assume the bad guys got into everything. So now I have hundreds of gigabytes of data that I have to send out to what's called data mining. So you send it out to a company to figure out, is there any personal information or health information in this data, just to figure out if there's been a breach or not, right? This is not whether or not there is a breach yet. So now you have a disrupt, you have to protect the system, you've got to make sure that your system's secure. Now you got to do the investigation. Then if there's a breach, now you have to notify the people in a certain way. You have to usually notify the Attorney General in your state a certain way. God forbid it's HIPAA, because then you got to report it to HHS and you can get fined out of existence. That's your best day. Your worst day, there is this big breach, and oh, by the way, they've encrypted your data, and that's when you find out. I had a client about 10 years ago. That's when they found out their backups didn't work. They never tested their backups. So somebody got into their system, encrypted their data. They said, don't worry about it. We back up every day. No, they hadn't backed up in 6 months. So they didn't have any choice but to pay the ransom because they didn't have any backups. So then you have to maybe pay the ransom if you can afford it, and or they will even give it back to you. Sometimes you pay the ransom and they give it back to you, but then they publish it or sell it anyway. And they could steal your money. So I had a client, another horror exam. I'm sure I'm scaring the bejesus out of your your audience, but I think it's important to know the bad parts that can happen, why it's important to plan. But I had a client that somebody got into their system and they just sat there. And this particular client was in a construction type industry. And they had one client that owed them about $100,000, and they were buying a piece of equipment from out of state for like $100,000. The bad guys saw this happening and said, okay, now's the time. They pretended to be the sales company and said, hey, pay us for this equipment over here. And then they pretended to be the company and sent to their client and said, oh, yeah, pay your bill here. $100,000 out the door, $100,000 supposed to come in, went somewhere else. And that's only when they figured it out. So they lost $200,000 and had to secure everything. So these are the horror stories that can happen. And the last part is, as a lawyer, you have a duty under every state's, I'm sure, certainly the ABA, and I'm sure every state has the same similar requirement to take reasonable steps to protect your client data. And if you don't take those reasonable steps, which I don't know what that means, some states like Virginia, where I'm personally licensed, and we're also in North Carolina, but Virginia, we actually have listed out in 3 comments, 19, 20, and 21 to the rules, says, hey, this is what we mean by reasonable, which is nice. That was back in 2016. We amended that. Other states don't. But basically, you have to take a certain amount of reasonable steps. And if you don't, not only can you have all these headaches and business problems, but theoretically, you could be censured, right? Maybe lose your license. So that's why you got to protect yourself and then get the right insurance. Insurance is critical because it's going to cost a lot of money. And you talked about business interruption. A good insurance policy will pay for that interruption.
So yeah, let's talk about insurance. We'll talk about insurance, and then there's one other big topic I want to talk about. So
sure.
What do we do about insurance? I've talked to you about this offline. Everybody's selling insurance, but not all the insurance is the same. So
right.
How should people go about thinking about buying the right insurance that has really the right protection and coverage for them?
Sure. Yeah. So that's sort of difficult in that we're used to general liability insurance or malpractice insurance or auto insurance or fire insurance, whatever. Those policies have been around forever. And so typically it's like, hey, I just want to know how much I want to spend, and you want to get a good insurance company that will, not mess around and will pay the claim, fine. But you kind of know what you're getting. It's like, oh, I know I want this kind of coverage and this is how much I want. And the terms and it's usually state regulated and they're going to be fine. Cybersecurity is not there yet. So cybersecurity is new enough that really the definitions and the exclusions can vary pretty wildly between policies. And there are a lot of companies that aren't awesome. Like they don't handle claims very well. I've got a client right now that had a policy. They called me. There was an incident. He put them on notice. He didn't get a response. Day 2, I'm hired. I call them. And by the way, his insurance policy said, we have to give you permission to hire somebody not on our list, and I don't sit on insurance panels. So they usually let me do it at whatever rate they'll authorize, but I have to get permission. So I'm calling them day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. I'm emailing, I'm calling. I'm like, guys, this is a data incident. Like normally these guys get back to you in 24 hours. What is going on? And I think it was day 7 when we finally got a response from somebody. I have since advised that client to change insurances, but they did authorize me to do it, and they're going to pay for the claim, and that's fine. But you want to make sure that you know what you're getting, and how do you do that, right? Because maybe even you know how to read an insurance policy. Odds are you're not a cybersecurity expert, so even if you know how to read an insurance contract, you may not know what the terms are. So what I advise is getting a good agent that knows cybersecurity. So I have several cybersecurity agents that I work with across the country where I say, hey, they specialize in this, so they know these are the types of policies you need. This is how much coverage I think you should have, and these are the companies. So there's 3 main cybersecurity companies I like. There's other good ones. I'm not saying these are the only 3, but the 3 that I prefer are Collation. That's who we use, and that's who I know a lot of larger firms as well use. I really like them. At Bay, and then CFC. So these 3 companies are the 3 that I really like their cybersecurity. I like their language. Their exclusions are reasonable. The way they handle claims are good. They know what they're doing. And Collation's actually pretty proactive. They're going to say, hey, here's some training. Here's some tools, which makes sense, right? Because the more they can protect you and the more that you won't get caught, the less they have to pay. So they're actually proactive, which I really like. So those are just 3, but mainly get a good agent. And your business agent may not be that agent, even if they're great, because they just may not have the cybersecurity expertise.
And so that's helpful. So, you want to set up your protections, hopefully, and train and all these. Hopefully you don't get breached. But if you do, then you want to have a good insurance policy in place. So
yeah, Yeah, let me just give two other things too, because a lot of people ask me, well, what are we looking at? Like how expensive it is. It's not that expensive. So our $1 million policy is about $3,300 a year. And we have $1 million in coverage, I think with a $10,000 retention. So at most, I'm going to pay $10,000 out of pocket. They will cover to $1 million, which will cover everything from the forensics to the lawyer. Because even though I do it, if we ever got breached, I'm not handling it. Like I don't have time for that. So I'll coordinate it. But the lawyer, all the notices, the forensics, business interruption, and the way our policy reads is they will hire an accountant to come in and figure out what our loss is, which I like because then I still may fight with them, but at least they're going to do the initial work and pay for it. But yeah, so $3,300 for $1 million, and you're more likely to have a cyber incident than you are for your place to burn down.
Yeah,
so
it's not bad.
Huge
That's
thing.
not bad at all.
No, it's not bad at all. It's great.
Okay, so last topic. We're going back to the news here. I came across it in the last few days. I don't know how long it's been out there, but Anthropic, so the maker of Claude, they've had this new, I don't know if it's a new model, whatever it is, something called Mythos. And so I'm reading about it all over Twitter that they started to test this thing out and it started finding on its own, I think, all these vulnerabilities in basically every software everywhere that we all use. And they said it's so powerful and it scared them so much that they said, we're not going to release it. And instead, they brought together all these heads of various software companies and they've created what they call Project Glasswing. So
Yeah.
What have you heard about Mythos, and is it all hype? What's going on?
So from whatever, and as you know, right, I do, not that I program AI, right, but I'm into AI, we use AI, I teach other lawyers how to use AI. So I'm pretty familiar with this space, both from a cybersecurity angle and an AI angle. The TLDR of this is it's a little hypey, but it's also not. So I think it's the middle ground, right? Which is good because that's sort of where it usually is. But yeah, so basically it's a frontier model they came up with, was very strong at code reasoning and vulnerability discovery. The goal was defensive. So what they want to do is, because the time between finding a vulnerability and patching the vulnerability is getting so quick. So the bad guys are using tools, they find a vulnerability faster than it can be patched. And Anthropic said, hey, maybe we can use these AI models, maybe we can come up with something that's able to identify these vulnerabilities before the bad guys do, which is a great goal. Where people started to freak out a little bit is because it's so good at what it does that they said, hey, if the bad guys get this, right, because it's not public yet, but a lot of these become public source, if it gets out there, the bad guys now, idiot bad guys at a press of a button can do what elite hackers used to be able to do in a week. They can do with a press of a button in an instant. And it's going to be unable for anybody that doesn't have Jones Day level money to be able to respond effectively. And so people were like, whoa. And so Anthropic said, you know what, that's probably right. So they said, we're not going to release this. They created this Project Glasswing where they brought in AWS, Microsoft, Apple, and they said, okay, we're going to give you guys are now in this playground, right? It's a private playground. You guys mess with this. You guys figure it out. You see what we can do with it. And there's been mixed views. So some experts are saying it's overhyped and saying, look, actually, some of these older models can do this too. It's not exponentially better at it. Some are saying, hey, it's the real deal. Like, no, this is really it. This is game changing, which I think is honestly I think that's the opinion on most AI. People go like one of them, Claude Cowork. Or Claude, yeah, was it Cowork or just the code? But Claude just came out with a word add-on. And some people are going, oh, it's super overhyped, it's nothing else. And then other experts I really like go, no, this is a really big deal. I don't know, somewhere in the middle maybe. But in any event, I think it's important, though, that it highlights the danger of AI, is that anything that AI can do for good, it can do for bad, which is why it's such a big deal for nation states, right? You know, maybe as American government, you know, we don't always make the best decisions a lot of the time. I would hope that we're not, you know, trying to overthrow the world necessarily, but, you know, we won't get into that. But, you know, there are, like, you know, China or Russia or North Korea, you know, they very well may have very nefarious means to do these things. And if they have these models and they're using it for war, what's going to happen? Right, and that was sort of Anthropic's stand on their AI model. They said, look, it's not necessarily that we're anti-protection or government. As I understand their argument is, our AI is not ready for prime time for fully automatic drone warfare, so we're not going to do it. And the U.S. government said, well, okay, now you're a danger and we're not going to do any business with you, and they're litigating that, fine. But that's sort of the thing is, look, if AI can do good, it can also do bad, and we just have to be really careful about what it's doing. And I think Anthropic made the right call here to say, okay, let's take a step back and not just open Pandora's box to the extent we can keep it closed for as long as we can keep it closed. So I think it was a good decision.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing, again, who knows if it's hype or not, but I read that the U.S. government had an emergency meeting. I think it was the Treasury, the Fed, and a bunch of the big bank CEOs. And apparently that kind of meeting has not happened since the great financial crisis. So everybody's like, just the fact that they had the meeting says a lot.
Absolutely. I mean, look, it's what we see AI can do a lot more, right? It's sort of like DARPA. So the military arm of the technology, for the government, DARPA, they're doing amazing things with technology that we don't even know about, right? Everything is about 5 to 10 years more than what we even potentially know as consumers. And you have to believe that that's where AI is behind closed doors as well, which is pretty astonishing if you just know what AI can do today. Like what you and I can do on Claude Cowork is pretty radical. And that's just publicly released now. So, but yeah, no, I think it's smart. We got to, it's really interesting. Because I'm a computer geek and a nerd, of course, I've really sort of done a deep dive on this. And there was a really long paper somebody had written, this is probably a year ago, and basically had this long dissertation about AI and the future of humanity and all this sort of stuff. And one of the things that the guy was talking about, though, was we really should have treated these AI algorithms like the Manhattan Project. And instead, we've treated them like a Silicon Valley, tech app. And the problem is now that it's out there, you can't bring it back. And it iterates so fast that, Skynet, it made me think, which I always joke that I teach about AI all the time so that maybe they'll make me a paperclip last. I'm like, hey, no, I'm good. I was telling everybody you should use you, right? So don't eat me loud. Don't eat me first.
Well, next time you come on the show, my AI will reach out to yours and they'll just do the show and we won't have to be there.
Well, this is an AI avatar. You didn't even know, but I'm just saying, right? That's funny. That's funny.
Well, Kellam, this has been actually very illuminating for me. Before we wrap up, any parting advice or thoughts for law firm owners out there on how best to sort of get their heads around this and protect themselves?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I know I laughingly said I want to scare you. I kind of do, in the sense that I just want everyone needs to pay attention to this. And I say every single business needs cybersecurity planning and some level of insurance. And I've got clients, I've got a 3-person operation landscaping company, right? They hired me to give them some basic level advice, like a data breach avoidance plan, which we work through all this stuff, get you the right insurance, make sure you're locked down, an incident response plan to make sure that you know because you don't want to build a bridge when it's on fire, a tech policy to make sure, a disaster recovery plan, and you have the insurance, you have these plans in place. In my opinion, understanding, yes, I do this for a living, but it's something you really have to do because the odds that you're going to have an incident, it's going to happen. It used to say when something happens, and then it said it was if something happens. Now it's when something happens, and it's when it happens again. So you're going to have an incident. It's going to happen more than once. And the better prepared you are and the more financially secure you are with insurance, the more resilient you're going to be because you're not Jones Day and you're not going to survive a big hit. I think the average cost of a data breach is mid-6 figures. If it's of any significance. And if you don't have insurance, that'll put a solo under. So it's just you got to be protected and you've got to have insurance. And I'm always happy to talk about it. Again, I've got that free guide, which if you go through, will give you some pointers to start. But yeah, I'm always happy to talk about it. I just want to make sure people are protected because it's such a big deal.
And again, so the best way to get in touch with you if somebody wants to reach out and discuss planning or whatever deeper.
Sure, yeah. So if you just go to my website, pzlaw.com, you can just find me there, and the guide's on there at /cybersecurity-guide. But just pzlaw.com. My email address is kparks@pzlaw.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. My first name's weird, Kellam, Kellam. So if you Google me, you'll hopefully find me. So.
And if you send Kellam an email that says, click this link, he's going to delete it.
Yes. Are you in this morning? I have some gift cards, right? I will not respond to those. We're good.
Exactly. Well, Kellam, again, thanks for coming on, man. It's good to catch up.
It's always good to see you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.